Welcome, everybody. Joe with ECRM here, and I have with me today Scott McKenzie, the Senior Vice President of Global Communications for Nielsen. And today we're going to talk about what life beyond COVID-19 is going to be like for retail and CPG. So, Scott, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Joe. Always good to see you.
So I watched your podcast, your webinar, and lots of great information in there. And what I thought was really interesting is the fact that you guys are in a unique position because of your global reach to really see what's going on in those countries that where this is kind of already passed, and and really analyze the different stages. So that really puts it in perspective because it's a moving target. So can you give a little background on that research that you've done, where you've done it, and kind of how that all has factored into your learnings?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a fascinating sort of period in time. So my team, the global intelligence team at Nielsen, has really been tracking this story since January. When we started to see those real escalated levels of infection coming out of China, and then that flow on that we inevitably saw in markets as varied as Iran and Italy. So what we started to do, by virtue of that footprint that you just described, was to look at what some of the leading indicators might be. So using particularly markets like China and South Korea as our sort of canaries in the coal mine to some extent, to get hints on what we might expect elsewhere in the world and how consumer behaviors changed along the way. And what was just extraordinary to me, I thought, because and you know this well, as you try to make comparisons of consumer behaviors, particularly on a global basis, that's very rare that you see high levels of overlap or repeat. In this instance, we saw incredible levels of repeating behaviors, almost no daylight. And I think in part that was driven by consumer behavior that was responding to the news cycle. So you saw purchase patterns in supermarkets around the planet being reflected against news cycles. That could be a Trump press conference, that could be a CDC announcement, a WHO announcement, but being able to interpret what was going to happen next became almost magical, because we at first we thought it was some flukes, and then we saw that there was just true consistency, which got very powerful as we started to hit the storm of COVID-19 spreading through the world and trying to help companies understand how to navigate it, which is something everyone's hoping to do right now.
Gotcha. Can you talk about some of those behaviors, those consistent behaviors?
Yeah, I mean, I think there was sort of the obvious ones that we were all a part of. At first, that panic buying, the pantry stocking, which happened pretty much everywhere except China. So China really sort of jumped straight from normal life into lockdown life because the country responded at an incredible rate of speed. So we didn't see Nielsen had identified sort of 6 early behavior types, these thresholds of behavior, and essentially China jumped straight to 4. But elsewhere in the world, we saw people stocking up on the essentials, so the pantry items like pastas and rice and things like that. And once they'd gotten some of those basics out of the way, we then saw a very natural progression to health-minded buying, so things like thermometers, preventative things like vitamins, paracetamols, things that people were putting aside to be able to protect their family and themselves if they were struck by the virus. And then at the same time, we started to see behaviors reflecting people not being out, people being locked in their home for extended periods, for weeks and now months in some cases. We saw a shift very much to home cooking. We saw that in China particularly, where that's continued. We're seeing consumers there still displaying behaviors that they call them homebody behaviors, where they're cooking more, they're taking more at-home entertainment, and they're generally not going out as often, perhaps because they've become used to it, perhaps because there are elements of health concerns that remain. but definitely some habits are starting to stick. Those purchase habits are starting to stick in some instances.
You know, it's interesting you mentioned that because one of the things that I've seen is how some of the categories of products that were deemed non-essentials in the beginning eventually started becoming essentials. Like, for example, hair coloring, right? From your data a little while ago, it just started exploding, which makes sense because now people are starting to see their gray roots come out in their Zoom videos or whatever, and toys. If you're locked home with your kids, you can be sure that toys are going to become essential items. And then other things like, in the neighborhood, a lot of people are starting to do arts and crafts. Like, I have a friend of mine who's painting rocks and just leaving them in different places. Or you have the whole rainbow thing where chalk. People are doing chalk designs in the streets. So are you seeing that in the data too?
I'm not sure about the painting rocks part in the data, but we're definitely seeing changes in habit, and I maybe need to look at the hair coloring thing as my gray hairs start to creep through. But what we are seeing, as you say, are pivots in what people are considering essentials, or things that they perhaps have never used or rarely used. So hair coloring is a good example of that. And there are knock-on effects that may come with that as well. Perhaps some people are happy with their ability to color their own hair at home. Perhaps some people have discovered they're actually not bad at cooking and understanding how to use ingredients. We're certainly seeing, sort of massive spikes in things like yeast for home baking, and lots of sort of foundational ingredients that classically folks would have avoided, or they went more for ready-to-eat options, or even ready-to-heat options, which is far less appealing in an environment right now where people are averse to going to the store in ways they never have been before. So we're seeing that reflected in basket sizes. So firstly, people are going to the store less often, but when they do go to the store, they're buying more products. So they're stocking up, and they're also buying bigger pack sizes as well. And then, of course, we've seen that pivot to online that's come along for the ride, sort of big spikes around online penetration levels. And then a gravitation, to your more community-minded thinking as well. Perhaps your friend with the rock painting is down this road, but just a gravitation to supporting local products. It has become really important. I think of myself, even this week, I live between London and Oxford in the UK, and in my small village, yesterday alone, I had a delivery of a farm box, and I had a delivery from a tomato farm. And I was excited. I was super excited for them to arrive. Like, that was a big part of my day. That was a reward. I don't think I would have been that excited by a vegetable box arriving in the past. So you are seeing these shifts in how we think, in how we prioritize.
That's certainly the case for me. I live in a New York apartment, and where we have tomatoes, not tomatoes, we could actually have that. And it's funny, I've never had that opportunity to actually have that contrast here.
Go on all day.
But we have, I have a small, 2-bedroom apartment, and I've never really pantry filled. And I've never, ever cooked frozen vegetables until this whole thing happened. But the thing is, now I'm loving it. I love them. I've realized how convenient they are, and it's really changed the way I cook myself. I mean, I still rely heavily on the George Foreman grill, and I haven't opened my oven yet. I mean, my oven. I don't bake, don't do anything like that. But it's just amazing how things have changed, and these are habits that are going to last. They're going to carry over once this is done.
Yeah, I mean, the frozen food you mentioned, our numbers, I mean, the Nielsen numbers are just reflecting extraordinary and somewhat sustainable at this point growth rates around frozen foods. And I think in part it's an ability to shop less often, so you can buy frozen food, put it in your freezer, and it gives you sustainable fresh vegetables or frozen fresh vegetables, for example, over time. But it's also discovery. And you said yourself, you'd never really cooked with frozen vegetables before. And I think there are whole generations probably who've not cooked frozen before. And we're seeing that this is not just a US thing. We're seeing this even in some Asian markets where a lot of people are living in very small apartments. Refrigerators and freezers are also quite small. Yet we've seen increases in frozen foods in ways we've never had before. And when we've surveyed those people and talked to them about what they're doing and how they're experiencing it, they're acknowledging that I never really grew up with frozen food, particularly younger people. They tended to go out or they tended to eat for the day, and, buy on the go. And that's really changing. And I think about it in the context of, I say this a lot, but I think we're all fundamentally recalibrating our lives right now as a consequence of what's happening around us. And of course, the implications for that, for business are extraordinary, because if your business is not recalibrating alongside a recalibrating consumer, then you're going to have problems on your hands. You're going to have real disconnects in demand and supply.
Well, speaking of discovery, I'm seeing a lot, and I wanted your take on this. I think a lot of consumers are trying new products initially because they were forced to, right? Something's out of stock, they're going to get the next whatever brand is available, but then so it's forcing trial, and they're actually liking some of these new products. So what are you seeing in that area as far as people moving into new brands, new products, just to kind of fill the gaps?
Yeah, I mean, you've gone straight to the heart of one of the really big issues confronting, sort of the CPG community broadly, and certainly the retail community within that. What we've seen. First, I'll tell you what we've seen, and then I'll tell you what I think a little bit. Well, what we've seen early on, and it's still being perpetuated across most categories, is there's two directions a consumer has primarily gone. The first is to a category leader. They've done very well in most categories. People are gravitating, in other words, brands that they trust and know, and they don't particularly care what the price is, by the way. So pricing sensitivity is not really mattering as much as they normally would. And then the other extreme, they're looking at value for money. They're looking at private label. So, what is that private label pasta, for example, that I can grab off the shelf, to your point, because it's available. So especially during those out of stock weeks where it was really tough to consistently get, what you were looking for, people did move off brands they hadn't tried before. They perhaps moved to adjacent categories even that they hadn't experienced before. So there was that notion of trial. I think about it almost as forced disloyalty in many ways as well. So we're certainly getting questions from many of our clients who are asking the question you are: how concerned should we be that people are trying something new and not returning to us? What are the longer term implications? And what we are seeing to those longer term implications piece is that in parallel with those changed behaviors and in parallel with the challenges in supply that have existed now for many weeks, though they're being solved quite quickly, I should add, in most categories. In parallel with those things, you've got retailers changing the SKUs, changing their assortment in ways they wouldn't otherwise have done. So they're reducing the number of SKUs that are available, firstly, partly from a point of view of simplicity, partly to make room for more in-demand products. So that could be cleaning products, for example, right now. So that's put a lot of pressure on some categories where the category leader is successful. The retailer's still got an interest in putting private label on the shelf, but those middle brands are really going to have to fight to stay on the shelf, particularly as the shopper generally at the moment is looking to go to one store if they can, get what they need, and get home.
And the retailer wants to make sure that shopper goes to their store. So if something's out of stock, they're going to plug the holes or with whatever they can, whatever what that's available. We've seen here on like our RangeMe platform, especially at the beginning. I mean, they were just the buyers were looking for all through the search options. You could just see what the buyers were searching for, and you could see it was those products or those categories that were in high demand, and they were just looking for any brand that had something that was available. And so I think it's important, and I think it is going to have a lasting impact on the assortments. What about online? How does online factor in? Because now a lot of people have gotten used to buying some staples online, and staples that traditionally took up a lot of space in the store. Is there gonna be a shift there as well?
Oh, I think there's no question that you're going to see a real recalibration take place in the dynamic between online and brick and mortar. You've got a lot of trial that's gone on, firstly, of folks who never shopped online before, who have now gone online, been successful in their experience, and are sticking. We're spending a lot of time right now looking at the repeat numbers, for example, in our e-commerce data, to understand, not just are they coming back, but where are they coming back to? So what are the categories they're gravitating to? Is that changing? And certainly, I think what's encouraging for the sake of online growth is you're seeing an expansion of range that people are going after in their online shop. So it's the staples or the larger items, as you say, that are bulky. Particularly if you live somewhere like New York and you don't want to have to walk with a giant pack of 3-liter Cokes under your arm. So we're seeing that sort of gravity towards those anyway. But what's interesting is you're seeing pickup in categories that were less popular online, particularly in fresh. People have perhaps tried fresh online for whatever reason, thinking that it might not be as fresh as it could be because they didn't buy it that day or whatever the reason or rationale they had. And their experience is a positive one. So we're seeing stickiness around categories within online that we'd not seen before. And there's some variances as well as you think about categories like health and beauty that have been challenged, or at least many parts of it have been, or it's pivoted to other things, like, as you said, hair coloring. So personal care and some of those categories are also popular online, but not always in the same way that they were popular. So this, again, and I keep using this word, but it's what we're doing. We're recalibrating.
I think it's and also seeing that consumers are looking for those products that are making them or bringing them a sense of normalcy. And whether it's like the hair color may be more reactive, but things like bath bombs or spa type experiences or just anything that's going to give them something to do and make them kind of feel, whether it distracts them or engages them, or just to kind of get them through this.
Yeah, it's interesting. We're seeing really two kinds of spenders emerging right now. And when we looked at this, well, to give you a sense of how we got at it globally, we first of all we looked at on a high level we looked at economic conditions. So things like unemployment rates, interest rates, stimulus packages, inflation, those kinds of things. Then we looked at Nielsen tracking data, so the sales data in countries around the world. We looked at attitudinal data, so what people said they do and then compared to what they actually did. And then we got underneath that by looking at what the health management environments were. So having done those three things, we then said, all right, well, what are the characteristics that consumers will adopt? And it really went a couple of ways. It was to a constrained consumer, those newly unemployed. I think, as we speak, the number in the US is something like 36 million people. So that's sort of that constrained spender that's either been on a borderline of being a constrained spender or is suddenly thrown into a constrained spending environment, which will only be amplified as recessionary sort of impacts start to kick in. And then on the other extreme, to your point about how people are treating themselves and thinking about looking after themselves, there's more of sort of an insulated spender, and that's people like us. We have jobs, thankfully. We have healthcare. We have a security blanket of sorts that allows us, particularly as we spend more time at home, to treat ourselves. We're probably not going to take an expensive summer vacation overseas. Where we're certainly not spending money on commuting or dry cleaning or all of the costs that come with the day-to-day life pre-COVID. So we've probably got more discretionary spend than we had before. And so we are seeing a little up trading going on in some categories. Perhaps I'll buy a nicer bottle of wine or a nicer cut of meat. And that premium treats are probably something we're going to see for some time in this environment. People won't go make a big purchase, like a brand new car perhaps, or when they do, they'll be giving it much more consideration than they normally would. But those small, risk-free or low-risk treats are definitely something we're seeing. And that's everywhere in the world we're seeing that, I should add.
It's funny, you just nailed my shopping behavior, because I was thinking, wow, I looked at my bank account and I'm like, I haven't made a withdrawal in like 2 months. And, sure, I'll use my credit card for around the neighborhood. But the other thing is, I'm not going out on a Friday night. So when I go to my organic market around the corner and I see that nice organic grass-fed strip steak, I'm like, you know what? It's $17. But if I went out for dinner or, went to the restaurant or for takeout, which as a New Yorker we do a lot, it would be a lot more than that. So it justifies these purchases. And not only that, it's probably a lot healthier for me too, and then, not going out drinking and hanging out with my friends. And, there is a big savings there. So it has let me kind of splurge a little more in those things that I would just make for myself in the house. So you nailed it right there with me.
It's a richer, healthier Joe.
Oh yeah. I'm getting more sleep now. It's just, you're right. All those things that you don't have to travel. I mean, I work from home anyway for the past 6 years when I'm not working out of my suitcase. So it's just the time savings, and it all of that kind of combines to really change the lifestyle. So looking out into the future, so right now you have, we're in a state where we're kind of starting to try to open up, but there's so many what ifs, and you talked about the mixed scenarios and, what if we have another wave, what if it goes away? What if there are so many things we don't know over the next few months? How do you navigate that, and what are your thoughts on what's going to happen as we're 5 months out, a year out, next year?
Yeah, it's this is something we've spent a lot of time working on and understanding, because it's a question that every company is trying to crack the code on right now. And we're thinking about it really in 3 time horizons, at least 3 time horizons in which we feel comfortable projecting. The first is around and I should say we've developed these on a global basis, so each country will be in a different scenario. The first is Q3, the most optimistic of them, where the economy starts to regenerate, retail reopens at scale, schools reopen, infection rates, the R rate, that curve is massively flattened. You're seeing health services coping in a way that is balanced. So you're seeing characteristics and attributes of behavior alongside that, purchase behavior, I mean. So consumers will sort of still be gravitating to things like essentials, but they won't be 100% focused on them. There'll still be those other treats, perhaps of the kind you described. Knowing that there will be this ongoing, almost I call it a barbell effect, where it's weighted on either end, that insulated and constrained spender. But as you move into Q4, and we're calling that sort of a reboot. The first Q3 is more of a rebound. Q4 is more of a reboot for sure, where characteristics start to change of consumers. And the circumstances around them start to change. So That could be, as you say, that could be a second wave. That could be an isolated second wave. Perhaps that's in a handful of states that you see that second wave break out. But there will be trigger points along the way that increases tensions, and that means increasing or decreasing, I should say, consumer confidence, which decreases, our desire to reach into our wallets and spend. And then you reach into next year, and that's the third scenario that we've built, which is fundamentally different. It's a reinvent scenario, and it takes you through really to the end of Q2 of next year, and that's a point not just of constrained spending for some. This is dire. They're incredibly dire circumstances. It's it's people on food stamps at scales that are absolutely at scales we've never seen before, and with no end in sight. So as we look at unemployment levels and youth unemployment levels in particular, running to in that sort of 20 to 24 age group, even those who are in college or about to come out of college and look for jobs. I mean, those numbers even now are running at about 30%, I think, if we looked at them on the end of April. So those sorts of numbers we've never seen before, and there's this desire out there, I think, for comparisons to be made, because people are looking for comfort. Oh, so what happened in 2008, 2009 in the Great Recession? What can we learn from that? What can we take from that? And there are certainly some baseline pieces that we can learn from that. But employment alone was a very different story then. It was, I think it peaked out at about 10% unemployment, give or take, versus today we're at roughly 15% in the US already. So that's one thing. But comparisons to past recessions, it's just really hard to put this against the past recession. Billions of people weren't locked in their homes for weeks. Millions of people weren't infected with a deadly virus. Thousands weren't dying every single day. I just don't think it's a fair comparison. I understand why people are looking for surety and something to anchor themselves to, but I don't think those comparisons are particularly helpful given the framework that we have in front of us right now of an ongoing health crisis that will never go away until we get a vaccine, which means consumer confidence can't be there until we get a vaccine.
Gotcha. So, looking out, it's got to be a little tough, because so many of those different things can happen. But what would, and putting recommendations must be challenging as well. But what kind of recommendations would you make for retailers and brands in how to best prepare for or adjust for these future phases that may happen?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, and what we've tried to do is identify guidance that runs through all of those phases, because some countries will experience all of them. They'll go through, that gentle rebound right through to the chaotic and difficult reinvent scenario. Others will leapfrog. But some may even go backwards if there are second phases of infection spikes. But one thing that I think is fundamental to any product and to any retailer right now is a culture that we're seeing of a demand for authentication. And what I mean by that is consumers are looking to understand the products they purchase and what they do for them, so the efficacy of those products in ways they never had before. So think about things, for example, like brand claims on the products. If I want to go into a store, and I want to go into a store less often than I have in the past, I want to get in and out quickly. So I've got to make some decisions quickly on what I put in my basket. Make it easy. That brand claim, if it kills 100% of germs, I want to know that, because that's for me right now. I may not care as much if the brand claim is help save the planet, because though I love the planet, I want to save my family first and the planet second. So that reprioritization of brand position is going to be critical. From a retail perspective, thinking about how to reposition in a way that provides absolute surety that the retail shopping environment is as safe, secure, hygiene optimized as possible, because that authentication to me is everything right now in my purchases, in my experiences. So I think that's something that if any brand or retailer has a question on where to start, that would be my starting point.
Excellent. Well, great. Well, Scott, thank you so much for all of these insights. I really enjoyed the conversation. And for everybody who's watching, we will have a link to the webcast that Scott did a couple of last week, I believe it was. And in that webcast, he talks about all of this data that this discussion was based on. So, again, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And stay safe.
You too. Stay safe, stay sane. Good to see you, Joe, and thanks for having me.
I'll try to stay sane. That's going to be a little tough. Take care.